Welcome back to another episode of post-apocalyptic terrain making, and this time making the first in a series of modular buildings. These will all have the same base, but they will also have different toppers so you can mix and match between them, using the same kind of template base size. And in doing this, kind of building up a sort of Wild West style post-apocalyptic shantytown. I've already got the tower and one shack ready, so I need to bulk out the rest of the town. So using the square as the base template, and then adding a little extra outlet building on the side to break up the shape, as well as using some rectangles of foam core to support the ceiling piece. Which also means I can leave the topper off and use it as a more playable area, and potentially run gangways and ladders between the different roofs, so you could have some more vertical combat. And for the topper, making an L shape out of more foam core, with a bit of insulation board, because it was closer to hand. I then checked did it fit on the roof, and as long as everything stays within that kind of square, it'll be completely interchangeable between the different buildings. And to make a door, grabbed a piece of plasticard, cut 2 strips and glued them onto the front using plastic glue, as well as a very crude door frame made out of the insulation board that I just carved away with a knife. Using various fancy cardboards, I then covered the sides of the walls. And the stuff is really nice when it paints up, that texture really pops with a bit of a dry brush. And I also used some balsa wood to carve some planks out the front, just to give it a bit more of that kind of Wild West theme that I didn't want to go too heavy on, but I wanted it to have an influence. And with a wire brush, giving a bit more of a wood grain on top. And I don't think this really made a difference in the end, but I've seen other people doing it, so I did it as well. Using a sharp knife, I cut out the individual planks, and then to make them look a bit more worn and knackered, went in and very carefully gave a bit of a bevel to the edge, so they seemed more kind of warped and badly cut. Of course, be very careful with your knife and make sure you have control of the blade at all times. To make it seem like they had a bit more elevation, I glued them sticking off the end of the base, so that they should mesh more naturally into a board underneath them. Using hot glue, attaching the door in place. The really nice thing about post-apocalyptic buildings is you can argue that they don't need windows, due to raiders or acid rain or any other number of bad things. And with that in mind, I cover the walls with various metals, which are actually cardboard. You can really mangle the piece up at this stage, and it still looks about right for a post-apocalyptic setting, which is a nice forgiving thing to craft. Although I do feel a craving to do something fantasy soon, just to break it up. Although, on the other hand, I do not miss carving out hundreds of styrofoam bricks. At this stage, I thought it might be neat to have some kind of cover over the top of the building, so you could have some more kind of playable terrain, and it would be like a little outpost if you used it by itself. But I actually go back and remove a lot of this later, just so I can have potentially planks and gangways running between the buildings later on. But I do like that vision of like the Wild Western buildings where they have those kind of high billboards facing over the top of the front of the building. I also broke up the metal by using some wooden planks, again carved out of balsa wood, and using the self-adhesive bedazzle beads as large rivets and just plonking them down on various strips of cardboard. For the few areas of ground and a few kind of dust deposits on the roof, I mixed up a bit of basing paste out of cork, sand, black gesso and PVA. This paste was then mushed into any of the areas where the foam core base was still showing. It's also useful because it just seals up the gaps at the bottom of the cardboard and the base, as well as giving you a deserty, rocky texture. And I applied it underneath the balsa wood planks, where even though you can't see it, it will add a bit more kind of integrity to the planks and make them a bit stronger. Before that had dried, I took the opportunity to push a few aquarium rocks into the base, just to give it a bit more flavour. I found when you buy these from aquarium stores, you generally get a lot more at a lot cheaper price than if you buy from, say, a dedicated hobby store. Using a knife, I punctured some holes in the topper so I could slide some bamboo dowels in, which would provide a support for some kind of canvas covering that I would add later, which is becoming a recurring theme and visually ties together all my post-apocalyptic buildings. It's also a case of where using cardboard is a useful thing that you can just push a knife through it. With the basing paste finally dry, I went in and gave a black gesso primer to the rest of the piece. Which was followed by a mid-brown, which is the base layer for the earth, and a nice rusty medium. Using a very soft brush, I found this very helpful to getting into the cracks and the crevices as well. Here is where I decided I didn't like the cover all around the piece, so I went in and just cut off one side of it. And I retained those primed pieces for later. For a metallic effect, I mixed together 2 metal paints, 1 silver and 1 tin. Then, using an old piece of sponge, dabbed over the sides of the piece, trying to avoid as much of the base and the wood as possible. The idea was to get a base level painted down, and then continue adding a few bits that would make it a lot harder to paint underneath. The main elements of these would be a front sign, as well as a kind of canopy covering the front of the base. So I gave a quick black gesso primer to the undersides, just so there wouldn't be any white areas showing through. And I used way too much primer on an all plastic base for use as the sign. But it just dries as a bit of extra texture, so it's no big worry. Using some more pieces of bamboo dowel, I stabbed some more holes in the top piece and had a canvas covering going over the side. On the rear of the piece, I purposely left an area clear so I could add a ladder. This was made out of some cocktail sticks and 2 planks of balsa wood, using a pin vise to drill holes in one piece and then using that as a guideline for the second plank. Repeating this process numerous times, I made a very simple ladder. Being careful not to break the balsa wood as I did so. With all the cocktail sticks in place, I then went in with a pair of clippers and trimmed them down. This is also where you can weaponize your build and use it to fire tiny cocktail sticks at your neighbours. I also used the clippers to mangle the balsa wood at the top and make it look a bit more worn and reused. Returning to the front of the piece, I glued the canopy over the decking with some more pieces of the bamboo dowel to provide supports and hold it up. Then doing the same for the signpost above it. Using a quick bit of paint just to bring it in line with the rest of the piece. Again, using a brown acrylic paint as the basis, and then sponging a metallic paint over the top, as well as going in with a brush and hitting any of the details, such as the rings on the ladder at the back, as well as picking out a few of the rivets and other details that I'd missed. For the wood, I've mixed together some white and the same acrylic brown as earlier, and with a bit more water to make it more fluid, applied it onto all the wood sections. With a bit less water, this was used as a highlight on the basing paste as well, just hitting the rocks and the sand texture, as well as overlapping a bit on the base of the building, where you'd have a build-up of dirt and sand. Swapping over to the soft brush again, I used it to add some weathering, as well as give a dry brush onto the metallic areas. This was also applied heavier on the lower half of the build, just to build up some more weathering from the ground, and blend it a bit more into the basing paste. It was also used to dull down the effect of some of the metallics on the roof, where again you would get deposits of dirt and sand building up. For the canvas coverings, I used some kitchen roll and dunked it in a mixture of PVA, water and brown acrylic paint. This was then used as a kind of canvas covering between the bamboo dowels. For the signpost, I decided this would make sense to be a doctor's house, or perhaps a guy called Doctor, as credentials are a bit iffy. To get the spacing right, I used a scrap piece of cardboard and wrote out the lettering so I'd know the spacing to use on the actual sign. Using a fine tip marker, went in and put down the base layer before going back in with a thicker brush Sharpie and going over the writing. Then, to make it appear a bit more haphazard, just gently feathered the edges of the text with the same marker. For some graffiti, again using a piece of scrap cardboard just to block out some designs, then going in with some various Sharpies of different colours, starting out with a coloured layer and then edging it with black once I had some weird shapes down. The nice thing about doing graffiti is it doesn't have to be good. In fact, the cruder it is, the more accurate it probably looks. You also get some very crude images, so I drew a little stick man with his mouth open as well. Then signed various words, crossed some of them out, wrote some over the top of them, and added some signatures to the bottom as well. Then to blend that all in, with the soft brush again, just went in and with the same pale sand colour, gave a very light dry brush over the top, just to weather it and dull it down a bit. With the graffiti dried, I decided it was done. So, using this as the basis for some other buildings, be able to mix and match the toppers, as well as use them as standalone things, or remove the tops if you need to put units up there in gameplay. You can also rotate the roof, so potentially you have 5 different versions of the same building. But anyway, thanks so much for watching, guys. I hope to catch you in our next one.